guest of honor, Catherynne, you all know. I would like to say one thing. The announcement that Elizabeth had was going to be interviewing Cat along with me was a glitch. It was not a personal news item. Liz is in the audience, smiling rather beatifically at the moment. Okay, Cat Valente, I think we all call her Cat after has been writing for the last decade or so. She's written a very large number of stories, poems, and novels in a variety of modes and genres, so powerfully that she strikes me as a critic as one of the prime examples, prime users of the freedom developed in the 20th century through the second. You're writing actually almost 7 cents. There we go. Yeah, those of us experienced in conventions, whether you see in the late Valente convention things sometimes get more relaxed, but it's actually probably better. So we're still waiting. Is it not quite loud enough? No. We're still awaiting that full. All right. I'll kind of start again. Cat is one of the prime writers, in my view, of the 21st century. I'll use the term that I usually use, fantastically, which just means all of the form, all of the genres, not mixed together carelessly, not just jumbled together, not mashed together, but used in a proper. Oh, I see, right? Put the other way around. Put it down. Okay, there. Is that better? Is that better? It's quieter. Yeah. Okay, so I'll just go on. This is going on longer than my secret word to myself was be succinct. That's 2 words. Exactly the problem. So there are a whole range of genres, and SF is one of them, but they are used in I think the 21st century. And a very significant way, I think Cat will probably want to talk about that. She's won awards, a Racing Award for poetry, 3 Locus Awards, I think, and Andrew Norton, was it 3? 5 Locus Awards, Andre Norton Award for I guess young adult literature. She began to publish novels in 2004 with The Labyrinth and stories in 2005, and has published I think about 75 since, which is a very substantial number. If she's publishing on a regular basis, she's writing and publishing stories at about the rate Joyce Carol Oates does. And that is kind of... and that's kind of like a model to aspire to if you're writing well and you're writing ferociously, which of course she does. So we'll get down to a few questions. I'd like to find out, because I was maybe very curious actually when I read it, just what kind of circumstances and motive and context the story that maybe most of us have read in the actual program of the very short story. It's a very sharp one. Where'd it come from?
So it's the prologue to a book I have coming out next year called The Refrigerator Monologues. It's the vagina monologues for superhero stories. And it contains a number of stories that, well, since I don't have the rights to Gwen Stacy or Karen Page or any of these people, I had to create a cohesive Marvel/DC analog superhero universe, as you do for a short book. And so each section is a monologue, a first-person story about an archetype of femininity within superhero comics. And I'm incredibly proud of it. And I can't wait for it to come out. And some of you may have been at my reading right from it there. It's probably the angriest thing I've ever written, and probably the funniest thing I've ever written. Most of you probably know that women don't fare too well in superhero comics, so I felt the need to put as much levity and humor in there as possible because it really gets quite dire. And it's such a unique project because there'll be comics for each of the sections as well. We'll all be packaged up the graphic novel. And I've actually been writing novellas quite a bit in the last few years. It's a form that I've come to really deeply enjoy. Of course, many classic science fiction and fantasy works would now be classified as novellas. And now we've got this idea of the fact, well, novel is being the appropriate, like for a novel, but I think such interesting things can be done within that description. Yeah, that is the refrigerator model. It's just one little section that I wanted to sort of use to introduce slowly, bit by bit, this project to everyone. We haven't officially announced it yet. And the third narrative is that all of these women are dead and you're in the underworld, and sort of having the world's most violent group therapy session down there.
Well, this all sounds, in a way, moderately recognizable as superheroes, the women, the underworld, but it is all very, very new. And it did strike me very powerfully when I read it, because how it's actually under all the apparent
Yeah, I mean, there's so much anger in it. And most of my career, I have here and there with novels and short stories, retold fairy tales. It's something that I'm passionate about. But superhero stories are our fairy tales. There's so much our fairy tales that we don't even notice that they are fairy tales that we're telling each other. The logic of a superhero story follows the same kind of logic as a fairy tale, which is no kind of earth logic. You know, the thing that everyone is punished and praised equally according to their perceived worth by the reader. If you think that this is a good person, then things will usually come out well for them. If you think they're bad, so at some point in the comic arc, you will get to have the visceral satisfaction of seeing them punished. This is fairy tale logic. The symbols always unite. They are these simple, condensed stories where a great hero performs great feats and is rewarded for them. This is the exact structure of Iron Hans, of all of these fairy tales that we grew up with. It's just that if we put enough special effects on it, we think it's different. We think it's better somehow than those amazing stories that have come down to us over millennia. And so I wanted to do with superhero stories the same thing I've been doing with fairy tales all along. And part of the reason I wanted to do that is that there is an assumption, I think an erroneous one, that fairy tales are somehow essentially feminine. That to retell a fairy tale is what women writers do. I've been accused of writing essentially feminine literature since I started writing. I don't even really know what that means, honestly. But it's the femininity of my writing has been commented on often. And I wanted to take what I do, that digging that I do, that rearranging, that not just deconstructing, but disemboweling, and apply it to something that people absolutely don't think of as feminine, that they absolutely don't think of as frivolous as many people think of fairy tales. So that was really one of the big visceral passions of doing this project.
Was there anything similar in the well-known fairy story series, the awards?
Oh, the Fairyland series. I mean,
the girl who sat, she could navigate Fairyland, her own making. Do you have any trouble persuading the publisher that that title was wash?
Well, look, I can't really stop telling stories about girls who go down into the underworld. It's just I am who I am. And the funny thing about the Fairyland title is it's a joke that only I thought was funny, and now I have to say it and type it over and over and over again. So Fairyland began as a motif in a very, very different novel called Palimpsest. It's an adult novel with a capital A and 3 X's. And the protagonist of that book is a girl named November, and her favorite novel from when she was a little girl was the girl who sort of navigated Fairyland in a ship of her own making. It wasn't ever meant to be anything. The first paragraph is in it. It's just a character note. I was making a joke about how long, obnoxious titles occurred a lot in early 20th century children's literature. Yes. You know, when I talk to like young high school writing students, I often say one of the nice things about being a writer is that you get to fill it with jokes that make you laugh and that no one else will ever acknowledge. And there's a weird, I don't really even know why I delight in that so much, but I do. And yet when it came time to actually write this book, which I did because people kept asking me where they could find it. They're like, well, where can I get that Fairyland book? That sounds great. I saw it on Amazon. And the reason they saw it on Amazon was that we did an alternate reality game to promote Palimpsest and skinned an Amazon page. And like it was a little Easter egg you could find. It still has my website URL on it, and it's always out of stock. So they give me stuff I forgive, and I was like, no, you know, post-modern kids do what post-modern kids do. And so I ended up writing it basically because I couldn't sell a book during the economic crash. So I serialized it online, and it went viral, and saved me both, you know, financially and in this very real way, like revived a career that had sort of fallen down. But when it came time to actually write that book, I couldn't possibly retitle it because of where it came from. I couldn't change the first paragraph because I already said that the first paragraph was in print in the books that came out from Readercon. Like that's set in stone. And so I was stuck with it. And the publisher never said a word about what the title was very long. In fact, the fourth book was called The Boy Who Lost Fairyland. And they said, oh, that's a bit short. You sure? Like, yes, one of them can be short. I've always been impressed that I just put my name, which has like 11 million letters in it, on the cover at the same time. But they never said a word about the title. I did have a terrible time with the copy editor, who changed all of my whimsical spellings. And decapitalized all the things that I wanted to capitalize, and then insisted that L, some of you may know who L is. A through L is a half wyvern, half library. It's a library. And I spelled his name E-L-L, a little shortened, and my copy editor insisted that in proper Spanish is E-L. So the only issues I really had with Fairyland was the copy editor, but it's all a trick. Because it had already been published online, so there's a lot of things in Fairyland I think I never would have gotten away with, ever, if I had just submitted it to an editor in a normal way. I mean, I've got polyamorous witches who are both married to the same werewolf. I don't really think that would have flown in the middle grade if it had not already won the Andre Norton Award. So I think that I sort of grandfathered myself into a lot of subversive stuff that might have gotten asked had the internet not already carved it in flaming letters.
But that really is a really thing that never crossed my mind. Really, either consciously or discussed that you can use the internet as a place to, as it were, validate legitimacy and make it ethical story like this. So really all prior.
No, it's just the first one, and I wanted to do the other ones the same way. I wanted to put them online first, and they absolutely would not hear that. They were not there for that kind of thing. And that's understandable. They need to make money from it, and they didn't feel that it would work the same way a second time. We did have, with the early 2 books, we had a weekend. There was 72 hours we could download it for free, just as a thank you to the people who had supported it. But no, it was just the first one that was written that way. But the thing is that once that's in the first one, you're in. Like, you can't, they can't suddenly say, well, you know, the gay kangaroo with the non-neurotypical memory is out, but the polyamorous switches are fine. So once you establish that the tone of the series is full of very strange and very, I don't know, overused and subversive, but non-typical plot points, then that's part of the series. And really, at no point, I mean, my editor and I discussed it. We talked around this whole idea a little bit, but she never said anything about the more unusual stuff in there. Which is how I get to have queer physics in a children's book.
It's a little bit like, I shouldn't make comments, but I find it interesting enough to actually come to watch it. It certainly is a bit similar to the way as soon as you do something, as soon as gay couples are allowed to marry, it has always been the case. You work out a way in which you can insert what you are going to do into a context where it has always been there. And
Yeah.
it seems that is the term, doesn't have any time, no past or future. So once it's there, you were able to do that.
Yeah.
I want to ask you a bit about your sense. You have a very wide range of ambitious stories and story types. And I was thinking I was detecting a fairly radical difference between your short, some of which is very short, and comes together in a lot of humans, and your novels. Are you aware as you begin to write a short story that is radically different?
I mean, it really depends on the short story and the novel. Lately, I don't know what's wrong with me. My short story brain seems to be broken. I keep writing short stories that do a little fan dance in the corner and say, I'm totally a novel. I've written a couple of books that stuck out as short stories. Palimpsest and Radiance both did. And with those, from the absolute first sentence, I knew it was going to be a novel. I absolutely knew it. And yet, I did this thing for 5 years called the Clute project, where I wrote a short story every month, and I printed it out and did a wax seal, which actually turned out to be the worst part of those 5 years, was that wax seal. I don't know why I added that in. I don't think it would have made any effect if I hadn't, but I still have scars on my hands from sealing wax on myself. And those were all 2,000-word short stories. I haven't written a 2,000-word short story since that project ended. None of those seem to want to be novels. But I've been writing a short story every month this year, just as a challenge to myself. And they've all turned out to be 10,000-word short stories, and almost all of them feel like novels to me, but I haven't committed to any of them yet. So I don't always know. If it's going to be or not. I mostly write short stories when I'm asked to write short stories these days. And what I really love is when an unusual anthology asks me to write a story that's sort of out of my wheelhouse. I contributed to Jonathan Strahan's Drowned World anthology, which is sort of near future dystopias when the sea levels have risen. Well, I would never, I don't think on my own, I would ever have written a story like that. It's not really something that I think, I mean, it's not that I don't think about that. I live on an island in the Atlantic Ocean. I think about it. But it's not really, it wasn't part of my fiction brain, and I loved what I came up with. And when I say I love my own work, it's not even that I love the story so much. It's not that I necessarily that I think I did a great job. It's that I love the people I made and got to hang out with while I was writing that story. I love the world that I got to live in. And I never would have been able to do it otherwise. But then, I have a new adult novel that'll come out from Tor in 2018, and it came out of a short story I wrote called Shootout at Birdhorn Ranch over the Bride of the World, which I wrote and turned in and thought nothing more of until several years later I went to LA-Con, I was guest of honor at LA-Con, and I was like, oh, I'll just read a short story for my reading. And I read that short story and walked out and went, wow, I think there's a novel in this thing. I didn't notice it when I was writing, but this feels like there's a novel in it. My partner was like, I feel like there's a TV show in it. I was listening and it's big. So I think it's that bigness, actually, Like if there's a sense of a hole in the story where so much more story could go that makes it feel like it could become something more. And for me, short story writing is in some sense kind of like a lab where I experiment with something before I decide if I want to make a giant hypothesis out of it, and throw things at the wall and pour them in vats and light them on fire and see what sticks to the ceiling and what burns through the floor. And that's always tremendously exciting for me. You know, writing a novel where it's something you've never done before is incredibly intimidating. Doing a short story where you're writing about powered armor when you've mostly written about fairy tales, well, that's something that feels a little more manageable. And so, in a lot of ways, I learned to write through writing short stories. I never intended to write short stories. I sold my first novel, and then a little while later, John Klima from Electric Philosophy emailed me and asked for a short story. I said, I don't write short stories. I don't really know anything about writing short stories. Like, I don't do that. And he said, well, I'll give you money. And I worked in retail, so I was like, I'll see what we have in the back. What we had in the back was nothing, because I really didn't know. So I went on this quest to teach myself about writing short stories, and I read nothing but short stories for 6 months, and I started retelling fairy tales in short story form, because then the plot was taken care of, and I could work on developing, creating a character in a short, small space, and I could work on sort of clarifying my language so the story could be told in that small space, and all the other skills that go with it. And honestly, I'd been nominated for the World Fantasy Award twice in the short story category before my editor said, you need to stop saying you don't write short stories. I was like, oh, okay. But yeah, I mean, it really is my lab. Short stories are my lab, where I put the goggles on and get messy.
I think there's probably more than that. The short stories that I read, several of them, are so intense and so self-contained, so strong, that they don't do anything but themselves. They're stories which are totally memorable. Others are lucid, like this, the one we started talking about, that clearly leads somewhere. And I got a sense, you may use the term yourself, I think of a lot of your work as so copious as a kind of archipelago. That all those islands are separate, but they're very much linked in conversation. That make any sense?
You know, if you ever in your life manage to arrange things so you can be complimented by John Clute, I highly recommend it. No, I think that's a beautiful image. It totally makes sense to me. I think of all the people on the archipelago and taking little boats to each other. That's really lovely. Yeah, they are. And I think I grew up reading everything, but my stepmother loved horror, just loved it. And I was the oldest kid. My parents were very young. So I had no rules about what I could read or what I could watch, because they didn't know about that yet. They didn't figure that was a thing people did. So I just got to read and watch everything. So I started reading big horror novels when I was 9 years old. And I peeled through everything Stephen King was writing, and I adored it all. And of course, Stephen King loved to intertwine all of his books and make them part of the same universe. And I think I did get sort of irritated with that later on, because I liked how self-contained they felt. But in my own work, though I've only sort of referenced one book within another a couple of times, I do think that they all sort of have similar noses or earlobes. They share family traits. So yeah, and many of them are of themselves. And I think I'm a little prouder of myself when I write a short story that is simply of itself and contained, because things seem to spill out all the time in my head now. And I like it when I can just do something that is nothing but its own.
If I can say something critical, it would be that those stories which are self-contained are absolutely not poetic stories at all. But they're stories in which none of what we think of as conventional poetical structures, richness that is detached from the subject matter, metaphor, all of that, they feel as though every single word was meant to be. And those stories, I think, are going to be a long time.
We're talking about refrigerator monologues, and as I was doing the edits on it, it really struck me that it's a very different voice than I've ever used in any of my novels. It is a much more casual voice. It is a voice that doesn't use nearly so much metaphorical language or the flourishes that come from my having been a poet for a long time before I was a fiction writer. And I realized I had done that in short fiction plenty, but I had not done it in long form. So like this book is coming out into my novel reader, the people who read my novels, who are very accustomed to a certain kind of language coming from me. And there are more F-bombs in this book than anything I've ever written in my life. And because they are meant to be monologues, they are written with apologies to Seinfeld, the way people speak. Which, any of you who've read what I write, I don't usually write the way people speak. But it is something that I've done in a number of short stories, and not really ever done it in the novel form that I can think of. So, yeah, I mean, in some sense, like, the poetic language is kind of a crutch for me, because I started as a poet, and that was what I did for the longest time. I never even considered writing fiction until I graduated from college. And I used to get really upset when people said that my first novel, The Labyrinth, was just a long poem and not really a piece of prose. And I went on NPR and got mad about that. But I'm much more secure in myself now, and I can admit that it's a 200-page poem. I had no idea how to write a novel. I took the margins out and I hoped for the rest. But because, I think that all writers have like a couple of superpowers and then everything else is hard. And for me, language came easily to me. It's always come easily to me. Like people ask how I write the sentences I write. I'm like, well, first of all, you don't want to write the sentences I write. You know, write sentences the way you write, because I don't think anybody would voluntarily write mine. But it's because that's not how I talk, but it's how I think. You know, when I wrote The Labyrinth, I had 3 languages bouncing around my head. I just graduated from my classics program. And you know, I had all these different syntaxes. The language comes as easily to me as sitting here in front of you talking. But because it's easy for me, I think in some sense I can make it pretty, and that can cover a multitude of sins. It was really probably more confessional than I needed to be in a guest of honor interview. but you know, these days, when I can say something in the raw fashion and still have it be pretty, that's when I feel like I'm living my best life.
I think being professional and honest in a long interview is something that remarks what you say that you might actually remember to, because you're actually talking about the actual craft of working and how difficult and easy it is. It's not, this is not emotional. I was thinking about conversation, and I was thinking about what kind of conversations you had, not necessarily with your peers, but with writers that have say, I think you were talking earlier, we agreed that maybe Valente was in your world.
Yeah, I mean, I love Valente, and I mean, he's just magical. His writing has always struck me as so incredibly confident. You know that you're in the in the first couple of words, and I couldn't say enough good things about it. I actually long ago, I wrote this thing called Invisible Games, which is obviously based on Invisible Cities, and it was online. It's all online. It's still there. Which will be important for the story in a minute. It's much like Invisible Cities. It was a false history of video games, where each chapter was a video game that had never existed, that in most cases could never have existed, involved technology or other that we've never had. But like Invisible Cities, like Calvino's magical realism, presented it in a completely matter-of-fact way. And so I have Calvino to thank for the fact that if I never wrote another word, I could rest on the fact that I accidentally created real folklore. And I will confess it to you, I usually, these days, do not live up to having written this, even though you can find out that I wrote it fairly easily if you want to. one of the invisible games called Kill Switch, and it's a very simple story. Story of an 8-bit video game that's very difficult to find, and people ran with it. It became copy pasta, which is the first kernel of folklore in internet culture. It's copy pasta. And then, for some reason, I never thought anything more of it. And then people started telling me to like Google it or look at YouTube, and there are videos of people claiming to have played this game. There are forums where people are arguing about what's in the game and where they bought it, and it's absolutely insane. There's millions upon millions of hits, and it's in all of these lists of like top video game hoaxes. Steam Greenlight, like somebody's trying to recreate the game. And so I don't actually usually own up to having written this thing. I did the first time I saw it, copy pasta, and then I realized how much people were invested in it first off. And I've gotten emails from people saying, please say it's real. Please say you're not just a fantasy writer. Please say this is something I can play. Please say you know how to get to it. And I just don't answer because I don't want to be like, oh, babe. I'm sorry. So Italian Cabina actually was such a direct inspiration and led to the creation of the thing. I'm so absurdly proud of it. It's not even 1,000 words long, and it has this incredibly long life in many people's imagination. I'll never meet and who will never know my name.
Any others?
Oh God! I mean, having the writers who.
Did you talk to or thinking about launch?
Oh, you know, it's funny. So, is Ken move here, or am I going to embarrass? Hopefully not. Okay, so I have a short story that if you're an Uncanny Magazine subscriber, you can read right now. Otherwise, you can read it in about 2 weeks. And I owed a short story. I committed to writing a short story, and those of you who write a lot of short stories, you may know that it's kind of the nightmare zone to have a publisher be like, write a short story about anything. Oh, God. You know, I like restriction. I like direction. And I had no idea what I was going to write about. Like, my little file of possible ideas seemed really anemic. And I just didn't have any notions. I picked up Kendra's paper magazine. I love Kendra's work. I mean, who doesn't? And he's amazing and inspiring. And I read half a short story, put the book down, opened up my computer, and like this story just vomited horror. And it had nothing to do with what I read from Ken. There was just something in his story that unlocked this bizarre tale of mommy issues and the end of the world in 1960s paranoia in Hawaii. I didn't mean to write about any of those things. I didn't even know I was thinking about them. And I love that. I love when, I mean, it's the circle of life, where, you know, what you read triggers all of these feelings in you, and if you're also a writer as well as a reader, those feelings will come out in their own way. It's kind of a folkloric cycle. I love that. I got to meet Tim O'Brien a couple of years ago, who wrote The Things They Carry. I got to do shots with Tim O'Brien a couple of years ago, which is the manliest I've ever felt in my entire life. Tim O'Brien is a very nice little fellow. And that was astonishing because I adore The Things They Carried. It's one of the few sort of standard required reading books that I think shines. It's just like nobody who writes a good book, even people who never read a book after college will be like, no, The Things They Carried is really good. And I love, and I think it's a huge part of my development as a writer. I love the role of line in that book. It's so unique. It's not unique in that people line literature all the time, but that he constantly is so good that he convinces you he's telling the truth over and over and over again, and then tells you that it's not true. It's wonderful, and I think that it goes so far beyond unreliable narrator, and I think that was huge for me. So it was really great sitting in snowy Cheyenne, Wyoming with Tim O'Brien doing shots. I walked into Readercon, and I don't think it really hit me until I did how long it had been since I'd seen some of my writer friends. And like 30% of Readercon are the writers that inspire me and that I talk to and that I find an incredible wealth of knowledge and information and ideas from. And it's amazing. As far as like dead people, I mean, I will stand tall for Sylvia Plath forever, and not in high school anymore. But she is astonishing, and I think that I started reading her when I was a 13-year-old goth, because that's when you start reading Sylvia Plath. And then sometimes you grow up and realize that she's truly one of the greatest poets in the English language. And I think she was one of the first ones that taught me what. Yes, what poetry could be if it didn't rhyme. I think that as a young person, that was what I really got from her. Because of course there are tons and tons of poets that don't rhyme, but like who you find first has a huge impact on how those techniques develop in you. And she's rigorous. I mean, no, it doesn't rhyme. Her scansion is hardcore.